Salam everyone, my name is Bilal, and today at MIA we're starting a new video series called Opinions, where we invite guests and ask for their opinions on academia, Islam, and perhaps the intersection. I am the co-president at MIA, and today I have a guest with me. His name is Mustufa Khan. He's very interested in politics, Islam, academia, and where they all intersect. Mustafa, welcome.
Thank you for having me here. It feels amazing to be here. And just to preface, I study business, but I do have very strong interest in social sciences, and as you said, the intersection between politics, current affairs, and history. So I try to keep up to date with that. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you very much. Hey, Mustafa, can you please tell me how you think research and academia can perhaps benefit the greater community?
Well, definitely research is one of the pillars of society. It's inquiry. It's how we grow, and definitely it's how we make understanding of things, and also how we find the best approach forward. In fact, a lot of the time, even if we talk about politics or even if we talk about current affairs, sometimes the best approach is the one that is born out of research, right? That's how we make policy. That's how we make the best laws. And that's also a reason why when we don't see a lot of systems work out, it's because they're not following that research-based approach that would give them that best outcome. And definitely the core basis for any academic, any civilization that wants to prosper, any group of individuals, it is research, because research is what informs us about everything from life to technology to social interaction. Everything is covered by research.
And why do you think Muslims in this age don't often perhaps consider academia as a career they can pursue?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question, and I think it probably has more than one factor associated with it. I think usually when we think about what career to pursue, we're more likely to think about certain fields. It's very common, and I used to think that it was just common here in our country. But it's not. It's more like, predominantly people think about, when they think of a career, they're thinking about money, they're thinking about respect and fame and prestige. And, it's not as if a PhD is not something that's respectable. Of course, it's the, highest attainable degree. It shows that you have, a certain mastery over your subject and, a very specific area of your subject as well. But I think what we see very often is that you could say that not all PhDs carry the same respect. Unfortunately, in public opinion, you might see somebody who's a PhD in science get more respected than somebody maybe who's a PhD in social science. I think a big factor is the fact that we don't create these opportunities for people that want to go into research, right? We need to accept people need to make a livelihood. We need to accept that, even for people that want to research, we have to give them that avenue where they can actually be free to do their research and grow and have that, inspiration as well. At times, I think we've made it hard. We've made it hard on people to pursue that aspect of their lives by, through all of these economic hardships, through stifling them, from having free inquiry, free research, and again, just the pure opportunity. You can't disconnect research from economics or finding other people of competency to do that research with. And I'm sure if you want to do certain kinds of research in this country, neurological research or other kinds of research, you're probably not going to find those kinds of resources. You're looking for some place that's more technologically advanced. You're looking for the right kind of academics in that field. And I think historically you also need to consider the fact that the way the knowledge centers of the world have shifted across centuries now. We do understand that it is predominantly the West that is leading in a lot of fields, and naturally people go where the knowledge is, and we do have to accept to an extent that this is where the knowledge is. So a lot of people end up moving out of these societies. They end up going to other societies, and then a certain portion of them, maybe a small portion of them, end up realizing their dream of research. But it's not something from the get-go that's very appealing. And personally, if I speak from experience, research is very intensive. It requires a very high level of understanding, requires you to read a lot. In this day and age, that is, I think, in shorter supply than it's been. And then you also need that interest to keep going, right? Interest in not even just in a specific subject, but interest within a very, sometimes very specific area of that subject, because that's usually what you're researching, right? You're researching a very specific area. Naturally, you will find fewer and fewer people who are very specified in that regard. That's just a natural phenomenon. But other than that, definitely there are these factors that are stifling Muslims from going into that field. We definitely need to bring forward those role models that we don't have. Admittedly, the Muslim world has produced amazing personalities, but we have to consider why we're always talking about personalities predominantly from, a significantly long time ago, like centuries ago. You do need to reinvigorate people by bringing in modern day figures that people can actually connect with. And I think that's definitely the one thing that we're missing right now.
Now, a big aspect of MIA and why we thought of the organization was just because high school students and undergraduates, if they're very interested in research, they face a lot of barriers. And one of the main or biggest barriers, which I think is our community and our society and our families, and just that support you don't get from families and the community when you go and tell someone, I want to go do a PhD and perhaps research, and the first question they'll ask is, how are you going to make money? And to them it's a very solid question. How do you think we can counter that?
Well, I think this is usually the case with any field of study. Even somebody who is very good at being a graffiti artist, but they're very good at it, they will eventually, I think, find some place or the other, maybe even an academic position at an art school, teaching graffiti art to students. The fact here being that if you are good at something, you are very educated on something, you're very informed on something, then that is your area of expertise. And sooner or later, that area of expertise will require some implementation somewhere or the other. Whether that's in academia, whether that's in public policy, whether it's some kind of external organization, the government or somebody else who wants research in this area. And sometimes you will face the obstacle naturally to develop interest in that field, right? We see that happen a lot in our societies. By that I mean Muslim societies, where we cherish certain topic areas much more than others because we don't see the value in them. For example, psychology. Unfortunately, we see a lot of graduates in psychology, but I would say in proportion to the number of people that graduate in that major and the actual interest in that subject as a whole is very low. It's inversely proportional, I think, to some extent. And then you have to realize it's also the fact that at times in our societies we don't encourage people to ask the right kind of questions, right? We don't give people that freedom to do so. And with research going into that field, you need to have, some level of creativity, some level of inspiration, and the capacity to inquire about things, right? If you're not letting people ask the right kind of questions, to develop answers in their mind, to think about how we can develop answers in our mind, even laying the basis for that. We never allow our young people to do that because we don't want them to do that. We just want them to adopt the existing framework. But if we want this, new revolution to happen where we're seeing, not enough people in research, we need to start changing the minds of people. We need to start saying, no, we need to start nourishing them or nurturing them from a young age to think about things in life. And that's how I started thinking about things in life too, when I started reading about things, when I started questioning things. And we shouldn't see that as a bad thing. We should see it as conducive to our own improvement. We should help young people find the right answers and develop their logical system of thinking. That's how I think we can encourage every person to go into research, even if it's not formal research, but
Right.
even informal research.
So just to summarize, what you're saying is that our communities and societies, they don't encourage youngsters to ask questions,
Yes.
and that is the basis of research.
Yes, very often we never really ask somebody to think about things in depth, right? It's often like you ask somebody to find you an answer, they'll find you the answer, maybe. But if you ask them to explain the logic behind it, that's where we all start to kind of struggle, because we are not really into systems of thinking. We're not into developing that capability of thought in people, right? It's like these days you talk about employers or even talk about jobs, you talk about anything. What are people looking for? They're looking for your reasoning ability. They're looking for your critical thinking skills. That is definitely an area where we lack, and that we lack there because we're not encouraging young people to develop these systems of thinking. We're not encouraging them to endeavor, to think, to question, and then to come up with answers to these questions. We penalize them so heavily that we make them feel bad about it, and then that negative association just carries with you your entire life. You're happy finding the right answer, even if you don't know what that answer means.
Very interesting. Thank you for the answer. My last question to you is, how do you think we can bridge the gap between the existing academic structures that we have and our religion, that is Islam?
Okay, now I think that's a very interesting question, and I think this is probably going to be talked about for. It is being talked about, and it will probably be talked about for generations to come, because this is probably the most pressing issue that we face right now as Muslims. What you kind of have to understand is, over centuries, the kind of fragmentation that has taken place within Muslim societies, where we used to be, part of these huge empires, living as one, sharing culture, sharing knowledge, exchanging all that information, living together, and then eventually the birth of nation states. The way that other secular ideologies, if you will, if we take that word, secular ideology, has overtaken other systems of thinking. That's something that we can definitely see, right? Today, when we go into the academic arena, that's the first thing that they advocate for, right? They're saying that religion and spirituality has no place in academics, right? So right from the get-go, we're stripped of that, right? And on a subconscious level or unconsciously, we accept that when we're in that academic arena, we're not consciously thinking about it, thinking about Islam. We're not thinking about spirituality, even though we should. And here's the reason why this is so important. As Muslims, we accept the Quran. We say that this is the word of Allah. We say that this is from God. This is from Allah, and we also accept the fact that the Creator knows better than us. Right? There are things in Islam that dictate our entire lifestyle. It's not just a spiritual mechanism as other religions these days seem, but Islam is a way of life. It extends to everything. In that sense, we do see the effect of Islamic laws. We do see the effect of Islamic knowledge on how we live as a society, right? And then you also have to ask yourself the question, if this is from God, then we have to accept that this is objective knowledge. Right? This is objective knowledge because it's from the Creator, right? This knowledge is something that can make us better human beings, better societies, better people overall. It can give us respect. It can elevate us. In the same way, we need to understand that all of these academics that we have today, you pick up anything, you pick up economics, the way our entire world economic system is dictated by interest rates. It developed out of centuries of secular thinking, that enabled interest systems to build up, right? That was a clear replacement of, the morals of Islam. We see this in other disciplines as well, back in, early 90s, even in, I think, early 1900s in psychology, they were practicing lobotomies and other really brutal things, right? That in today's world would, to an extent, be extremely unacceptable, or electric shock therapy and all of these other things. And then when you think about it, these things really don't have a place in Islam, right? Not in that sense. It's not something that we encourage. We don't encourage all of these things. But if we want to take these things forward, we want to make a more ethical field. We want to make something that is compatible with our values. We need to understand how to uh, take the existing knowledge that we have. We study in schools and universities for pretty much our entire lives, right? Easily decades of our lives, easily, right? And all of that is set in this secular paradigm, right? And we spend a very insignificant amount in comparison studying Islam. That's the great tragedy. Because when we think about Islam in the academic field, right, what are we thinking about? We're thinking about scholars. We're relegating this task to them. When we think about Islamic finance, we completely relegate that to everybody else. And in a way, we are not really thinking about it. Even though you and I and all of us here, we have so much knowledge, so much understanding, that if we started thinking about this knowledge in terms of religion as well, we start thinking about the fact that we need to replace the existing economic system. We need something that's compatible. We need to think about other subjects in the way that Islam has taught us them. We have to recognize that the fundamental basis of a lot of academics today is based on an understanding that is not consistent with the morals of Islam. It has no place with the morals of Islam, and we need to replace those philosophies with the philosophies that are compatible with Islam, and that is how we can then take it forward. And I know it's very scary, right? I know nobody wants to do it. I know people will say, oh, there is no place for this in academics. That's why you have branches of academics, right? Isn't this part of inquiry? We need to have these branches, and we need to develop them consistently with other Muslim academics, and understand and propose better ways, better theories, and eventually better systems. It's going to be a long-term effort, but this is the hope that we need to have. We need to come back to our religion, come back to those moral values, come back to accepting that knowledge that's from God. There is a lot that we can still learn from our religion that we aren't implementing in our lives. And academics is the basis of society. As I said, research drives your society forward. Now think about all of the research that we're doing. We think about it, we say it's objective, right? But in one way or another, a lot of research that we do is not consistent with Islam. And the effect of that research is going to carry on for centuries and centuries if we're going to adopt it. And eventually we're seeing the outcome of that, where our societies are now slowly but steadily moving away from any semblance of Islam in public life, which is very similar to any other secular nation in the world. And yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for the answer. And that is going to be all. Thank you, Mustufa, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It was a pleasure, and please stay tuned for new videos.